Hi, this is Michael Learned, and you're listening to TV Confidential.
Ed Robertson welcoming you back to TV Confidential, radio talk show about television that is remembering Ralph Senensky. Ralph Senensky, longtime member of the Directors Guild of America and one of the most prolific directors in television history. Ralph Senensky passed away Saturday, November 1st, at the age of 102. We are replaying a conversation we had with Ralph Senensky that originally aired on our program in February 2014.
It's interesting you mentioned the FBI. There's a Waltons connection in that a few years prior to when you started doing the Waltons, you had worked with Richard Thomas on an episode of the FBI.
When I worked with Richard, it was just a year or so before I did the Waltons.
Okay, Richard would have been in his late teens, early 20s, but he was already an accomplished actor by that point.
He started as a kid in New York. Yes, he had been acting forever. I think Richard, I'm not sure if it was his first, but Richard was, I think, one of the children in Sunrise at Campobello with Ralph Bellamy on Broadway.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, you include many recollections of your work with Richard on Senensky.com, and it's interesting, Ralph, you describe Richard Thomas the way many people would describe Ron Howard in terms of his professionalism and how it seemed like he was born with grease paint in his blood because he'd started working from such an early age. And there's certainly a similarity there. And what's interesting is that you directed them both on the Waltons in a show called The Gift.
Yes, it was the second episode of the Waltons that I directed.
You include some behind-the-scenes stuff about it, but there's a pivotal scene with John Boy and Ron Howard's character in that show that, first of all, it's a great scene to watch in its own right, but having read the backstory about that particular sequence...
Are you talking about the scene on the swing?
The scene on the swing where John Boy, reveals his fears to Seth, Ron Howard's character, about dying so young. And, there's a lot of presence and maturity that Richard had to bring in that character. But it's, again, I don't want to overuse the word interesting, but it's a given that both he and Ron had a lot of, maturity as performers. It's just a really powerful scene.
Oh, absolutely. In writing about it, it was a very interesting morning because we were doing it first thing in the morning on the back lot of Warner Brothers, and Richard showed up at the set, and he said the scene didn't work. Well, I knew exactly what it was that didn't work for Richard. He didn't have any lines.
Yeah. Well, he was the star of the show.
Yes. and that being my second show, so I was still pretty new there. Mm-hmm. But earlier, when we had shot out at Franklin Canyon, there was that scene with Ralph and Richard, and they took it upon themselves to arrive on the set, and they told me that they had rewritten the scene, and I had a lot of work to do out there, and I was in no position, as second-time director to start arguing, so I filmed it, Well, they were not happy back in the office when that scene showed up, especially because the story editor, Carol McKean, who was a wonderful writer, well, that was Carol's first show that she had written that was being aired, and I wasn't going to get caught in that again, so I called Bobby Jacks, the producer at home, and he came down, he hopped in his car and came to the studio and came out to the back lot and went aside and talked to Richard, and I never knew what went on, what the conversation was, but anyway, Richard came and did the scene, and the thing that always tickles me is that that little bastard stole the scene without a word. I think he steals the scene.
Well, it goes back to what we said before. I mean, he may have only been, 20 years old at the time, but he had been performing from a very early age.
Oh, absolutely. And again, with his reactions, just as Michael was concerned all the time, a lot of the time, because as the mother, she didn't always have lines. I mean, but she would be in scenes where she didn't have any lines, and yet she was a presence. But I never had any conversations with her about it. But I knew about her feelings about, why am I here? And yet she just was powerful. So much so that in later in the show with Beulah Bondi, the one that Beulah won the Emmy for, the pony cart, there is a scene where Michael is planting potatoes, and Beulah sits on a little box, and Beulah's talking about her past and about losing the home. I mean, just about her past. She had the words, and Michael was reacting. The night that the show aired, Beulah threw a little party for 4 or 5 people to come have dinner and watch the show, and I couldn't go because I was filming at night on the episode of Family. Mm-hmm. I was told afterward by somebody, I think it was by Mary, one of the Baldwin sisters, that when that scene came on and was airing, and Beulah blurted out and said, "Well, she's stealing the scene."
We're talking to Ralph Senensky, longtime member of the Directors Guild of America, and a man whose many credits as a director in television include 12 episodes of The Waltons.
This conversation with Ralph Senensky originally aired in February 2014. Ralph Senensky passed away Saturday, November 1st, 2025 at the age of 102. As it happens, our conversation with Ralph in February 2014 aired within a few days of the passing that year of Ralph Waite. Ralph Waite, the actor, of course, who played John Walton on The Waltons.
Ralph Senensky is sharing some of his memories of working with Ralph Waite and the other members of the Waltons cast. I want to ask you about Ralph Waite in just a second, Ralph, but just to go back to the point you made earlier, it kind of speaks to one of the challenges and one of the differences between what a director does in television and what a director does in motion pictures, which we talked about a little earlier in our conversation. In motion pictures, the director is the end-all, be-all. In television, the director really is more of a collaborator, and you have to sort of factor in that if changes are made at the set, on the set, you have to see, okay, is that something the producer would do? Is that something the writer would do? And especially if you're just first starting as a director on a show, you have to learn the dynamics of all of that before you make decisions.
The dynamics, and also to respect the actors. Mm-hmm. And then, when I went on a show like The Waltons, I certainly didn't come on and on my second show feel that I knew more about the characters than they did when they were already they had already done, 20-some shows, close to 30 shows. Your comparison to films only works most of the time. Mm-hmm. But I guarantee you that when a director was working with Burt Lancaster was making the final decisions, or Steve McQueen, or even earlier Betty Davis. I mean, stars like that, they knew, and they had the power.
Yes.
They had the power.
Yes. Yes.
And I mean, like with Davis, I mean, when she worked with Irving Rapper, I mean, she had the power. When she worked with Willie Wyler, she met her match.
I've heard that about Wyler.
and gave 3 of her finest performances.
Yeah. And certainly that holds true today, even if it's a high-profile director directing George Clooney. George Clooney still carries a lot of weight on the set today.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't remember who said this to me. Many years ago, it was a television director who said this to me, and he said, one of the biggest differences between directing for television, directing for film, is oftentimes the director on television is a visitor to the set and not always a welcome visitor. And you kind of touched on that in telling the story about finding out that Ralph and Richard rewrote some dialogue in a show that you were directing, and because you were new to the set, you didn't know all the intricacies of how to play it, and so in that case, you sort of went with the flow.
Well, and also there was the element of time. Mm-hmm. I wanted to spend a day in Franklin Canyon. I wanted to open the show, The Gift, with the boys fishing, and I didn't want to do it on the back lot where there was no space. I wanted the space of that, and Neil Nafio made a deal with me that I could go there if I would give up a half a day of shooting. If instead of a 6.5-day schedule, which is what the Waltons allotted, I could go to Franklin Canyon if I would shoot the show in 6 days. Well, I had a lot of work to do. I mean, I had a full day's work at Franklin Canyon. I mean, there was the opening sequence. There was the sequence, the one we're talking about, the scene with Ralph and Richard. There was the sequence where the boys come back to get a branch of the apple tree. There was a sequence where Ronnie, when he's coming back from the doctors and has now found out that he has leukemia, and then he runs away from the house. And I wanted to do a scene where I did the scene which I shot at Franklin Canyon, where he ran through the woods and then had a place where he just screamed. That was a full day's work. I didn't have time. I just did not have time to start even just take the time to discuss. There wasn't the time, because if we had done that, and if I had not, and then got to the end of the day and it's too dark and didn't finish my day's work, it wouldn't be like film where I'll come back and finish it tomorrow.
No.
I mean, it was now or never.
Yeah, you really have to be a pragmatist. You have to be a pragmatist to work in television, regardless of, whether you're a writer, director, or an actor, or a producer. But certainly, as you just described, especially if you're doing location scenes, and you only have 5 or 6 days, or 6.5 days, which is the case with the Waltons, there are certain decisions, you have to make in the moment, and you have to factor in a lot of things in that moment.
Absolutely. And the other thing is that once I'd done the first 2 or 3 shows, especially I think after I'd done The Gift, from then on there really were never any problems, because if a director showed up and knew what he was doing and they liked his work, then they respected him so that they weren't feeling defensive and feeling that they had to protect their turf.
We're talking to Ralph Senensky. Ralph's credits as a television director includes episodes of such classic series as The Waltons. This conversation with Ralph Senensky originally aired in February 2014. Ralph Senensky passed away Saturday, November 1st, 2025 at the age of 102. Stay with us, folks. We'll be right back. One more item. If you're starting a company, particularly one that is in an emerging market, you know that averting any sort of legal dispute is crucial to your business plan. Our friends at Tectonic Law offer an array of services that can help you avoid and preempt future litigation while also developing and protecting your intellectual property and intangible assets. Tectonic Law serves the needs of a host of emerging industries throughout California and beyond, including industrial designers, beverage makers, artists, farmers, retail stores, health practitioners, wellness experts, cosmetics manufacturers, nonprofit organizations, innovators in sustainable practices, and libraries. Go to tectoniclaw.com to learn more about how Tectonic Law can help your business thrive. tectoniclaw.com. Rock solid representation for groundbreaking industries.
This portion of TV Confidential is brought to us by our friends at Front Porch Realty, the community of realtors in the Northern Bay area of California that is committed to finding the solution that is best for their clients. Whether you're a first-time home buyer or looking to sell or lease your property in Northern California, call Karen Strain at 415-886-7411 or visit frontporchrealtygroup.com for more information on how they can help you.
Ed Robertson, thanking you for listening to the TV Confidential podcast. If you like what you hear, please hit the subscribe button so that you won't miss our next episode.
Hi, this is Ellen Geer, and you're listening to TV Confidential.
Trouble getting your thoughts together, son?
There's a lot to say. I want to say it right.
Your mother told me what happened in church this morning. Don't you think Germany's a little far away to worry about what's going on over there?
Didn't seem so far away in 1917.
No, but they learned their lesson then. I don't figure they're going to start any trouble now.
You agree with Matt Fordwick.
I guess most people figure the Chronic was going to cover local news, son. Leave the major world events to city newspapers.
Daddy, the world's getting smaller every day. And pretty soon, any piece of news is going to be local news. And one book burning, one treaty violation, one threat to human dignity ought to be reported in every local newspaper across this country. Now, I got to be free to pass on to my readers anything that I think is important. That right's been done away with in Germany completely. You know what Adolf Hitler says? He says that free press is drivel. Drivel. And if there's one book he doesn't agree with, he burns it. He burns every copy of it. Now, I don't want to see that happen here.
I don't want to see that happen either, son. I'm proud of you. Acting on what you believe.
As we record this conversation, Ralph, it's a few days after the passing of Ralph Waite, who played John Walton, the patriarch of the Waltons. It's interesting, you were telling me off mic that in your opinion, Ralph Waite did not always have the impact that he could have had on the Waltons because he played John Walton almost understatedly.
Well, that was his power, and that was basically his character. Mm-hmm. John Walton was not an educated man. He was struggling to make a living during the Depression with a large family, married, with 7 kids, and his parents living with him. And they lived in, up in the mountains, in the wooded area. He had a lumber business. That was his character. That was a character that that film had been made many, many years before. As a matter of fact, when the first time that Earl's book was made into a film, the first time he wrote about his family, it was called Spencer's Mountain.
With Henry Fonda.
And Henry Fonda played it. Mm-hmm. And in Earl's book that he has written about the series, and he tells that they offered the role of the father to Henry Fonda because he had played the lead in Spencer's Mountain. Mm-hmm. But Henry Fonda was a very bright man, and the way the series was not constructed like Spencer's Mountain, like the feature had been. And Henry Fonda turned it down because he said, the boy's the star.
Mm-hmm.
And Ralph Waite seemed to understand that. He seemed to understand that, and just again, given what I'm reading up on him and learning about Ralph through talking to people such as yourself as well as Michael Learned, he knew that in a 2-shot, he knew that to give Richard his moment as an actor because, John Boy is the protagonist of the show. But at the same time, when John Walton had something to say, it carried that much more gravitas because of what Ralph brought as a performer.
Absolutely. In The Conflict, which was the first 2-hour show I did, guest starring Beulah Bondi, mm-hmm. and Ralph had a long scene where he goes and pleads before a panel of senators to, so that Martha Corinne Beulah would not have to leave her home because of the highway coming through. And he was wonderful in it. I mean, he was just, the thing that Ralph brought was, this quiet compassion, and he was not an educated man, but he was a very intelligent man, and he was a very compassionate man. There's a favorite scene I have that Ralph did was the scene with Richard in The Firestorm, mm-hmm. and it's the story that John Boy was going to publish in his newspaper an excerpt from Mein Kampf, and the town is in an uproar over it. The minister does a sermon berating him because of doing that, and John, who did not hear the sermon because John didn't go to church, mm-hmm. but there was a scene where he came out to the place where he had his printing press, where he did that, and you knew that he was coming out, that everybody else has spoken to him, and their concern was for John Boy's safety, that for the whole town to be so up in arms, not that he's wrong, but that maybe because he's so young. Mm-hmm. And John Boy explains to him why he's doing this, and I just thought Ralph brought a great nuance to the scene, that his appreciation that in this case his son was so bright, was really brighter than he was. Mm-hmm. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful establishing of John's strength, but at the same time of his awareness and appreciation that his son is more educated in terms of some things, probably wiser than he is, because he's educated. Ralph just did that. Ralph as Michael. I mean, they just brought such a quiet strength to what they did. I mean, there was no ranting and raving. That was up to Grandpa and Grandma.
Yes, that was up to Grandma and Grandpa. Ralph Waite brought a quiet strength to playing John Walton. Off camera, I understand Ralph Waite was a very gregarious personality, with a body sense of humor.
Absolutely. And the main thing, of course, was, Ralph came to this from New York.
Mm-hmm.
He came from New York because he was in this theater. Ralph was a classically trained actor.
Yes.
Now, Ralph was a trained actor, and the wonderful thing was about Ralph was that when he came to film, and I'm not sure just how much film he had done before he did this, but there is a difference between acting on stage where you're projecting to the last row, and acting for camera where the camera's right there, right in your face, and you just do less. You do more, but it's inner.
Yeah. I mean, he knew how to reel himself in for television, and he seemed to adapt. He seemed to adapt well. He seemed to adapt well to the medium. I know that he played one of the inmates in one of the chain gang members in Cool Hand Luke, and I think he had done 5 Easy Pieces and a few other films before he moved on to television. But again, both he and Michael were also classically trained actors. I know Michael established herself up in San Francisco at the American Conservatory Theater.
Absolutely.
Ralph Senensky, longtime member of the Directors Guild of America and a man whose many credits as a director in television include 12 episodes of The Waltons. Ralph Senensky passed away Saturday, November 1st, 2025, at the age of 102. We will play more of our conversation with Ralph from February 2014 later this month on TV Confidential. We'll take a quick time out, then Les Lanham will join us when we come back right after this.
Now you can fly anywhere in the world and pay discount prices on your airline tickets. Book a flight today to London, Paris, Madrid, or anywhere else you want to go. And pay a lot less guaranteed. Call the International Travel Department right now at Low Cost Airlines.
800-222-0511. 800-222-0511. Again, that's 800-222-0511.